Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. One of the more popular conversations that we're seeing take place across the college football landscape, really according to the national media, is the sloppy game that Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks played on Saturday night against Idaho. And I think what it comes down to is a lot of these national media talking heads getting up there and just looking at the scoreboard of this football game, not having watched a single snap of this football game, and just kind of assuming that Oregon played a 10-point game against an FCS opponent. Maybe this Oregon team is not as good as we thought they were. Now, Dan Lanning would be the first one to tell you this was not the standard that Oregon wants to play, right? At a 10-point game against an FCS opponent, we have higher expectations about this Oregon program. That 100% is true. That being said, when you dive into this football game, and I've watched this game a couple of different times since Saturday night, this Oregon team was much better than the scoreboard reflects. Even look at some of these numbers, right? 3 times as many first downs as Idaho had. You had over twice as many total yards gained than Idaho had. Keeping in mind, Idaho gained probably a fourth of their total yards on one trick play in that football game. Want to get into a few things that we saw from Oregon in terms of the film and talk about what they need to clean up heading into week 2 against Boise State, but also talk about it's too early to panic on this Oregon team. Yes, they didn't play to their standard, but when you start diving into every single play of this football game, this Oregon team was really good. They just didn't execute on a few things that they obviously need to clean up heading into 2024. Really excited to get into some of the film. Before we do, and as always, to the Oregon fans, one, I know there was a lot of frustrated Oregon fans. Quite frankly, you guys knew I was frustrated talking about this football game Sunday morning. Would love to hear how you guys are feeling kind of 72 hours removed from this game in the comment section. More importantly, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. The amount of support the Oregon fans have continued to show the boys, it's been amazing. Appreciate you guys. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And let's start with kind of how this, before we get into the film here, I want to start with just how we saw this offense kind of constructed. I'll say this real quick. I thought the defense was really damn good, especially on the defensive line. I think you're starting to see some of those young edge rushers take that step. Derek Harmon obviously making his presence known. This Oregon defensive line, I think, is much better than it was last year, which was one of our big talking points in terms of Oregon really being a national championship contender. How physically imposing can they be along the lines of scrimmage? I was really impressed in terms of what you saw from that Oregon defensive line. I think it's really talented. I think it's really deep. Now, getting into this Oregon offense, I want to start with we're going to get into the offensive line because I think part of Dillon Gabriel not pushing the ball down the field had to do with the offensive line just not giving him a lot of clean pockets. And we're going to talk about why that was in just a second. But I think regardless of that fact, Dillon Gabriel's got to do a little bit better job pushing the ball down the field. There were a couple plays on the film that, hey, we have opportunities to push the ball down the field and manufacture some explosive plays. I think Dillon Gabriel might have been a little bit of gun shy. Now, you look at this Oregon offense and even go back to last year with Bo Nix running this offense, it was one of the best offenses that we saw in the country, but it wasn't necessarily an offense that was predicated on pushing the ball down the field. Bo Nix's average depth of target was 6.4 yards down the football field. Right, this was not an Oregon team that was routinely pushing the ball down the field because that's not really how Will Stein has constructed this offense. This offense is created with playmakers on the outside, like Tez Johnson, getting the football in space and operating after the catch. That's what you brought Dillon Gabriel in to do. But what made Oregon's offense so special last year is when you wanted to start taking away some of those short intermediate route concepts, Oregon could push the ball down the field with a guy like Troy Franklin. We know Dillon Gabriel can make those throws. We know a guy like Evan Stewart can be that kind of wide receiver that provides you that vertical threat. You got to see Oregon and Dillon Gabriel take advantage of pushing the ball down the field a little bit more. You take a look at some of the numbers. Dillon Gabriel's average depth of target was 4.3 yards down the field. That's about as low as I've seen a quarterback have in my time of looking at that kind of number. It is extremely low. He only attempted 8 attempts, 10 plus yards down the field, which he was 5 of 8 on. Like, we know Dillon Gabriel can make those throws. He just didn't necessarily do it against Idaho on Saturday night. That could be a result of, hey, we're just not going to run our full offense against Idaho because we know we don't need to run that kind of offense. That could be part of it. But I also want to see Dillon Gabriel start to put that on the film and kind of show that this Oregon team, when you want to start taking away some of the short and intermediate concepts, we can punish you down the field with a guy like Evan Stewart. I think as Oregon fans, we want to see that, and I think we will see that come Saturday against Boise State. Now, getting into the offensive line issues, a lot of it had to do with Charlie Pickard at center and kind of the shuffling of the deck. And you get into some of these reps that Johnny Cornelius took a lot of heat. I didn't think he was as quite as bad as a lot of people are kind of insinuating. Now, the first rep we're going to look at here, I think this has to do with Poncho kicking out to guard and just not having repped a ton at guard before, right? You kind of go back to how spring practice and fall camp went. I mean, Matthew Bedford was starting at guard. Poncho was your center. And I don't think Poncho has a ton of experience playing guard. And you look at this 4th and inches play where I think Oregon fans are probably really frustrated in terms of, hey, we're the Oregon Ducks. We think we have a very good offensive line. We should be able to pick up a yard on 4th down if we want to against a team like Idaho. You run the film on this play. This is blocked up really well. You look at Josh Connolly Jr. at the left tackle spot. This is exactly what you want to look. Little counter power action. Josh Connolly is just walking down this defensive lineman. This is set up. This arguably should have gone for a touchdown. You have Poncho coming around. Now, the big problem that we see in this play here, these two trip over each other. And you got, I think his name's Kawika Rogers, who is that extra offensive lineman in this package, getting beat on the inside. That's obviously a problem. But when you have your two pullers tripping over each other, this play is largely blocked up quite well by this Oregon offense. This play should probably go for a touchdown, but you roll through the film, Poncho's tripping, not picking up anybody, and you get stopped. Like on aggregate, that was a very well run play. But as we know in the sport of football, when you have that one mistake that is critical in terms of that play being executed the right way, that's what happens sometimes. And so you look at this and say, Oregon physically imposed their will on the offensive line right there. Poncho not being very comfortable at the guard spot, tripping over when he's trying to pull to the play side. That's what kind of happens. Again, you run this play back. It's blocked up really well. Josh Connolly Jr. being extremely physically imposing. Poncho's coming out as the lead blocker. If he doesn't trip on this play, you're probably getting a helmet on a helmet here. And I'm kind of comfortable with our running backs kind of taking that to the house, or at least being a chunk play, and it turns into a turnover on downs. Now, the second thing I want to get into is Charlie Pickard in pass protection struggled a little bit, especially giving up depth. You saw some communication, and we're going to get into some plays where the communication wasn't great between Pickard and Poncho. But right here, Johnny Cornelius is going to get the blame for this play. This isn't a Johnny Cornelius problem. I mean, he's running this edge rusher 10 plus yards behind the line of scrimmage. Dillon Gabriel should have a pocket to step up into. But you look at this within 2 seconds, not even a second of this play, Charlie Pickard's getting walked back 4 yards between the line of scrimmage. Dillon Gabriel doesn't have any pocket to step up to. And so Johnny Cornelius, in my opinion, is doing his job. But there's no pocket for Dillon to step up to. He ends up hanging back there, strip sack, fumble. Idaho gets the football. And Charlie Pickard, it's a great story, but he did struggle at times in pass protection. I didn't think he was horrible, but when you have those plays that cost you, a turnover, that tends to get highlighted on the film a little bit. I don't think Johnny Cornelius is the problem. And hey, was Johnny Cornelius great in this football game? Absolutely not. I don't have any concerns about a Johnny Cornelius. He is going to be an NFL tackle in the next couple of months. I think Charlie Pickard probably got to get better on the inside of the offensive line. You go to the next play I want to talk about here, and here's the kind of communication problems, right? 3rd and 7, you roll this play here, and I want to focus in on Charlie and Poncho here at the center and right guard spot, because Poncho thinks he has help on the inside. And again, I think this is just communication. Again, Poncho's not used to playing next to Charlie. He's not used to playing guard. It's blocked up well at first, right? Poncho thinks he has help on the inside from Charlie. Charlie's nowhere to be found, not really looking. And so I end up getting pressure on the inside the pocket. Again, a lot of the pressure was coming from the interior offensive line. Dillon Gabriel, as usual, does a really good job of extending the play, keeping his eyes down the field. Probably has to make this throw over the middle of the field, misses it, and you end up punting in your own territory. So again, I think 1, Charlie Pickard struggled a little bit. I think 2, the communication between Charlie Pickard and Poncho was not great. I would expect it to get better if they continue with this kind of offensive line. And more importantly, like on aggregate, I thought this offensive line did an all right job. But when you have guys tripping on play side pulls and getting off and not being able to pick up the 4th and 1, it tends to bother a lot of Oregon fans, which I don't blame Oregon fans for being bothered by that. Last play I want to look at, talking about Dillon Gabriel and a couple miscues that you saw. Again, Dillon Gabriel, what, 41 of 49 for 380 and two tutters? Not a bad performance. This won't happen again, right? You get man coverage right here with Tez Johnson. I think Dillon Gabriel pre-snaps like, all right, we're walking this in for a touchdown here. Like Tez Johnson is going to create separation, which he does. Perfect play call by Will Stein. Tez Johnson creates a lot of separation, should be a walk-in touchdown. The chemistry between Bo Nix and Tez Johnson last year, Bo Nix is just throwing him right into the end zone. I think that's what Tez Johnson expects. He starts sinking back into the end zone. I think Dillon Gabriel thinks that Tez Johnson is going to sit it down and ends up just missing that throw. Look, we've seen Dillon Gabriel. He doesn't miss those throws. We've seen it throughout his college football career. Lord knows he's played a lot of college football. And so Dillon Gabriel does not normally miss those throws. I think that had to do with a little bit of chemistry and communication between Dillon Gabriel and Tez Johnson. I feel 100% confident that that gets cleaned up throughout the season, and that goes for a touchdown and a lot of other Saturdays. You end up kicking a field goal, right? It should be 7-21. It ends up being 7-17, kind of a tight game in the fourth quarter. So as I continue to dive into the film of Oregon from that game against Idaho, I don't think it was as bad as a lot of people say. I think there's a lot of national media analysts who are getting up there and just kind of looking at the scoreboard. Hey, I don't blame them for not tuning into Oregon, Idaho on a Saturday night when you had Michigan playing or when you had Texas A&M and Notre Dame playing. A lot of people are speaking on this game having not really watched this football game. I think a lot of Oregon fans, again, are frustrated that this was a game that you had to sweat in the fourth quarter. I don't think it was nearly as bad as a lot of Oregon, not really Oregon fans, but more the national media is kind of talking about. You look at the AP poll, they drop them to number 7 in the country. I docked them. I took them from 2 to 3. I put Ohio State over Oregon. I think that's fair. You want to see a little bit more from Oregon. That being said, I'm not ready to panic about this Oregon team. At the end of the day, you took in 15 transfer portal players. A lot of them are going to be starters for this Oregon team. It's going to take a couple games for them to gel. On paper, this team's still one of the best in the country. I expect them to get better as the weeks go on. And again, you're kind of just building up for that Ohio State game. I'm saying you don't look over past Boise State, a very good football team. You want to see some of this stuff get cleaned up. But again, I'm not panicking on this Oregon program. We'll cut it there. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.